What's up, guys? This is Beast Coast Arturo Sanchez here, aka Sabin, aka NYC Furby, aka Arturo. I'm back again with another video, and this time, we're gonna be putting some of the retro fighting games on a tier maker. Now, guys, I've been playing fighting games for well over 30 years at this point. So like I do understand like a lot of the history, and there are like a lot of legacy fighting games to go through. Now, I'm not gonna list every game. So don't get too triggered in the comments. If I don't list your game, there's just too much to go over, and I have to do all of this like in a short time. Depending on the video here. But like I did pick like a bunch of games that we're gonna talk about. And I'll talk about the history and where I think they should be placed.
Hey guys, EE here. I'm really excited to bring on this new product from one of our great sponsors on Beast Coast, Sumo Forte. And with me in the chat, I actually have a couple homies who've actually tried this product out already, the Suma tape, which is really good for their gaming needs.
And they have this transdermal mentholated CBD tape.
I've actually been really looking forward to trying this out. Dude, it does feel good though. I'm not gonna
All right, so let's see. Take a look. Let's take a look. See here. So the first game we're gonna cover, we're gonna actually cover a Karate Champ. Now Karate Champ, if you guys don't know, it was one of the first fighting games ever to be made in existence, right? You might have seen Karate Champ in the famous movie Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme. There's a scene where they're actually playing on Karate Champ, but before the big fight. Now it was published by Data East in the early 80s. It was one of the first fighting games in existence. And, for me personally, it was one of the first fighting games that I played myself. Now, obviously since it's the early 80s, it's kind of a simple game. There's no button layout or anything like that. You have like two joysticks actually, which is pretty interesting. And using the two joysticks, using a combination, depending on which direction you go, you'll do like a set move. Like for example, if you want to do like a sweep, you hold like the both joysticks down. If you want to jump, you hold down and up. If you want to do like a forward punch, you hold like both forwards, so forth and so on. And it's a one-touch kill type game. 2 out of 3 rounds. First to two wins the set and gets the girl at the end. And it was my early introduction to fighting games. Obviously it's kind of archaic by today's standards, especially on the movement. There's no combos or anything like that, but it is a pretty influential game that a lot of you guys might not be aware of. But as far as ranking it here on the tier maker, let's see. It's kind of hard because obviously, you can't necessarily put it to like modern standards or anything like that, right? If I had to rank it, just for the legacy. Obviously they never came out with a sequel to it or anything like that, and it's kind of archaic. All right, so see, this is really tough. I can't give it an S. I can't give it an A. You know what? I'll give it a C. Because it's not like it's bad or anything. It's just like an archaic title that never got updated, but it was one of the first to introduce the legacy. So I'll put it here at a C. All right, so the second game I'm gonna talk about here is Yi Air Kung Fu. Now this is a fighting game in the not so traditional sense. So it's basically like a 1P fighting game against the computer. There's like another game that was made by Konami in the early to mid 80s, right? And it's it's kind of like a mix between a fighting game and a side-scrolling beat 'em up, because again, it's one player against the CPU. You're fighting like a predetermined list of opponents. Some of the characters in that game are pretty iconic. I really like the music and the art style. It's very simplistic with the button layout. Obviously like there are some special moves. Again, it is a mix of a traditional fighting game along with a beat 'em up. So think kind of like I want to say maybe Karate Champ, cross like a Final Fight type of game, but. Again, it was another really influential game for me. It was a game that I played like a lot growing up. And, this is all before Street Fighter 1 even came out, or Street Fighter 2, So these are all titles that are like, precursors to what fighting games even are today, right? So if you haven't picked up the game, check it out like an emulator. I believe on PS4, Konami re-released these titles So definitely check it out. It's obviously simplistic. You might like it. I certainly did back in the day. It's definitely like a game that I remember, which is why I brought it up in the list. Shouts to Konami. Everybody involved for making that. As far as where I would put it on the tier list, let's see, I'll probably put it in the same category, like C. Not because it's not a good game or anything, but obviously with modern standards, it's a bit dated, but it's definitely something that I think you should go back and play, just for the lore and for the history. So third game, Fatal Fury. There's going to be in the same vein as Street Fighter here, and obviously, when we're talking about the Fatal Fury franchise, it is a long storied history of games and franchises. So it's not like a specific game, but I'll talk about the history for a bit. So Fatal Fury and Street Fighter 2, they came out within I believe 6 months of each other in 1991. It was basically like almost back-to-back releases. At that time, SNK and Capcom, they had fierce competition with each other. But one of the things that you guys might not know is like a lot of the developers and the publishers and like basically everybody that was involved in these games, especially during Fatal Fury and Street Fighter 2, they were going back and forth from Capcom to SNK. So I'm not sure exactly what was going on there. It was like a back and forth like poaching of developers. You can find out more about this if you watch you check out Okamoto-san's YouTube channel, and Okamoto was one of the creators of Street Fighter 2, where he actually touches on this in English, like about how SNK and Capcom, like the developers, were going back and forth from multiple companies back and forth, right? So a lot of the ideas are similar. It's not necessarily like a clone per se, but yeah. Needless to say, like a lot of these guys knew each other. One of the things that stands out to me personally about Fatal Fury, that makes it stand out from Street Fighter per se, is so it's a traditional 2D fighting game, like Street Fighter style, of course. But the thing that made it stand out was the lane switching. So 2D game, you can switch from the foreground to the background, and then there's kind of like a middle lane. So it's 2D in a sense, but you can kind of like dodge out of the way by going into like another lane, and then they can kind of jump into your line of sight, etc., so forth and so on. It was definitely pretty interesting. And like I said, like there's so many Fatal Fury games, just to go off the list. And I'm probably gonna miss something. Fatal Fury 1, Fatal Fury 2, Fatal Fury Special, Fatal Fury 3, Real About Fatal Fury, Real About Fatal Fury Special, Real About Fatal Fury 2, Fatal Fury Dominated Mind. Oh my god, like I can literally go on forever. Like Garou Mark of the Wolves, right? There's literally like so many Fatal Fury games. Garou being one of the latest in the series franchise. We would love to see like a Fatal Fury game again. Garou was kind of like the pinnacle, one of the pinnacles of 2D animation. Garou Mark of the Wolves, right? Anyway, in general, check out the franchise. I think it's really great. There's so many games to cover here, right? And as far as Fatal Fury's contribution to the genre and where I think it is ranked personally, let me see here. All right, so I love Neo Geo, by the way. I would put Fatal Fury as a B. I'll put it as a B. It's really influential to the franchise, and it's really influential franchise, I should say, and it's really important to the FGC in general. Like, although it might not be so relevant today, the game still gets played in a bunch of niche scenes. I want to say Fatal Fury Special still gets played by a lot of the OGs, as well as some of the newer Real About Fatal Fury titles. I think it's a fantastic series. You should definitely check it out. I'm gonna put that there at B. All right, so the next game, of course, Street Fighter. And Street Fighter, definitely kind of needs no introduction. But if you weren't around during the early days, here is a brief recap. So Street Fighter 2, was one of the games that changed the FGC forever. It was really, the graphics were like out of this world. It was the first game. It was one of the first games where you could kind of combo special attacks, and it was kind of done as a fluke by accident. There's so many legendary bugs and glitches. In the 90s, you couldn't go to an arcade without seeing Street Fighter, Fatal Fury, Mortal Kombat, Samurai Showdown, etc. It was definitely a staple and like that game sold like wildfire all around the world. Street Fighter 1 wasn't that good though. Like the early concept, the controls are kind of jank. Street Fighter 2 was like a total evolution of the design. It was done on Capcom's legendary CPS-1 arcade board, which at the time I believe the development kit for that was the Sharp X68000, which was a Japanese-based computing system, and basically it was a CPS-1 inside with more memory. So that's where like a lot of the games were developed on. And if you want to find out more about Street Fighter, like it's well documented all over the place. Still relevant today with Street Fighter 5. And there's way too many titles to mention. Even more than like Fatal Fury here. Has to be like about 25 or 30 titles. We're up to Street Fighter 5 now. Obviously, season 5. My personal favorites of the franchise of all time: Super Turbo, of course. That's Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the 5th or 6th evolution of the Street Fighter 2 series. I really enjoy Street Fighter Alpha 3. I think that is one of my favorite alphas of all time. Shout out to the Street Fighter EX series as well. That was co-developed by Akira Nishitani, the one of the founders of Street Fighter 2. He made his own spin-off company, Arika, and made the Street Fighter EX series in 3D. So and of course, I really enjoy Street Fighter 5 as well. All right, so to put it here on the tier list, man. Yeah, I think Street Fighter has to be an S on this, just because it set the precedent for like a lot of clones in the industry, and pretty much changed the game. So shout out to Street Fighter, of course. No surprise here that I personally have it at S. All right, so up next, World Heroes. So World Heroes, there is kind of like a forgotten game. It's one of the Street Fighter's title style clones that is a little bit niche. You might not know it, but a little bit of history about World Heroes. It was developed by SNK/ADK. ADK, from my understanding, they were one of the co-developers. They were one of the original third-party or second-party developers of the Neo Geo platform. ADK stands for Alpha Denshi. So like they did have some say the original concept of how the Neo Geo platform was developed. So it was no surprise that a lot of the ADK games, like they really put the Neo Geo to shine. So it's another 2D style fighting game. Like you have 4 buttons because of the Neo Geo format, right? First World Heroes had punch, kick, and throw, right? And in order to do the heavy buttons, you had to hold the button down to do heavy. You had to press the button lightly to do like a light. You had like your throw button. But the interesting thing about that game that stood out to me was the deathmatch mode. The deathmatch mode was really cool because obviously when you're playing a 2D fighting game, you don't want to get put in the corner, and like the corner is really dangerous because you can no longer walk back in a 2D fighting game. You have to eat all of their moves. But in World Heroes, the walls are actually really dangerous, especially in deathmatch mode. It's like sometimes you'd be fighting against Muscle Bomber, and it's like you're like in a ring, and like if you touch the ropes, you get set on fire. Some of them have like landmines and spikes. And then in some of the other World Heroes games, most notably World Heroes 2, that was one of my favorite games growing up. I really liked the deathmatch mode in that game because it had a tug of war system. It had a tug of war system where you guys are both sharing one life bar, and even if you're about to die, you could actually rally all the way back and then make tug of war swing in your way, while the whole time avoiding all the deathmatch traps that the game has. Anyway, definitely check it out. So my favorite personally is World Heroes 2. There was a sequel, World Heroes 2 Jet, and World Heroes Perfect. World Heroes Perfect was the last version in the franchise, and it's probably like the most developed. But yeah, check out all of them. I think World Heroes Perfect is the one that gets the most play. And shout out to SNK ADK for this franchise. Definitely one I played growing up. As far as what I would put it in a tier maker, it's kind of hard to like rank it like higher than Fatal Fury. So I'm gonna put this here at a B. Like it's a solid franchise, but it's definitely forgettable. Definitely more people know about Fatal Fury than say World Heroes. But personally, I like it. I think it's great. All right, so up next, the next video, of course, the classic Mortal Kombat. Tin, tin, tin. Oh man, brings back so many memories. Obviously I'm a Street Fighter guy, but like when When this game came out in the arcades, oh man, this game literally changed. This game literally changed everything. You know, when Mortal Kombat came out, people were having congressional hearings about it. You know, it was one of the games that started the whole rating system and the ESRB because like all the parents were complaining about the blood and the gore and all this stuff. You know, and you know at the time, you know, it came out when it was definitely like a good alternative to Street Fighter. If you didn't like Street Fighter, you would play Mortal Kombat. And Mortal Kombat does things fundamentally different than Street Fighter. It's a totally different franchise. So, if you guys are not familiar with Mortal Kombat, and I'm sure you are, you know, it's like Mortal Kombat is still going strong today. One of the most well-selling franchises of all time. So, the game has a high punch, low punch, high kick. Sorry, I'm not doing kicks. Low kick, and block, right? So, it was one of the first games with a straight-up block button. You also had like a throw, which you could do by doing forward and low punch. But the main difference was that you could actually block throws, which was a huge difference from like, say, Street Fighter. So in Street Fighter, people would get really upset if you did like a low short and tick throw them to death all day. People would really hate that stuff. And, you know, back in the day, there was no facts or guides to tell you how to get out of this stuff unless you had the magazines, right? So people would get really mad over that. So Mortal Kombat was kind of a counter to that. You could throw, but then again, like you could hold down back to block and then block all throws. So you just be punching, you doing chip damage, stuff like that. And again, like the game is a total departure from traditional 2D fighting games at the time. One of the first games with motion cap. It was one of the first games in motion capture. They had really good voices, sound effects, graphics, everything, right? Like the game was fire, you know. So huge shouts to NetherRealm. You know, obviously the NetherRealm Studios now. But back in the day, they were known as Midway. And, you know, it was definitely one of the games I played a lot growing up. At the time, I remember, like, Mortal Kombat 2 coming out. And I remember playing it more than Street Fighter. And the reason for that was because at the time, like, I think Street Fighter 2 Turbo had come out. And Street Fighter 2 Turbo was created to counter all the bootlegs coming out from Champion Edition. Champion Edition had a lot of ROM hack releases, a lot of Chinese pirate bootleg boards that pretty much made the game completely broken. Street Fighter 2 Turbo was like a redesign of that. Then they moved on to Super Street Fighter 2, which was done on the CPS2 hardware platform. And the graphics looked really good, but the game was a lot slower than Street Fighter 2 Turbo, right? So like I wasn't feeling the speed. And you know, Mortal Kombat definitely scratched my itch during that time, especially Mortal Kombat 2. It's one of my favorite Mortal Kombats of all time. That's one of my favorite Mortal Kombats of all time. Just the entire presentation and like how the game was displayed, the graphics really blew my mind back in the day. You know, shouts to Ed Boon and like the whole Midway / NetherRealm team. I'm sure some of them are still around today. Anyway, so this is like a franchise I have to rate. I can't. So there's no way I could rank it lower than Street Fighter. Like this game is too iconic. You know, I'm gonna put it at an S. Even though like I'm a Street Fighter player personally and I prefer Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat is a game that's just as influential as the Street Fighter series. They deserve to be in their own tier. Okay, so up next. So, Virtua Fighter. Oh man, so Virtua Fighter is a series that I've been a fan of for a really long time. And if you notice here in this tier maker, I do not have Tekken here, although shout outs to Tekken, and you know I'm gonna explain why. So Virtua Fighter was like the first game that got it done with 3D polygons. The first Virtua Fighter in arcades, it was truly an amazing technical feat, right? Like, you know, it was the first polygonal fighting game that felt good and looked good, you know, although it was a bit blocky at the time. You know, it was a 30 FPS game. You had your guard, you had your punch, you had your kick, right? And I believe it was done on Sega's Model 1 platform, right? And at the time, you know, 2D fighting games were dominating the space. They were definitely dominating the space. But Sega showed that Sega with the AM2 legendary arcade developers, you know, much shout outs to them. Like they were doing groundbreaking things back in the day. They were the first ones to show that, hey, you know, a 3D fighting game could work, and it is indeed possible, right? Now, obviously, you know, Virtua Fighter, you know, hasn't gotten a big release in a long time. We do have Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown on PS4. You should definitely go check that out, right? So it's just like a brief history of the Virtua Fighter series to recap. You know, Virtua Fighter 1, 30 frames per second. Virtua Fighter 2, you know, they cleaned up the polygons. It was a lot better. ported to Sega Saturn, the 60 frame per second game. Virtua Fighter 2 had even more of a jump than Virtua Fighter 1 graphically. Virtua Fighter 3, the arcade board was on Model 3. It was actually co-developed by Sega themselves and Lockheed Martin, the military company in the US. They actually had a hand in developing the Model 3 board. The graphics were out of this world. We didn't see it ported until Dreamcast came out 3 to 4 years later. Like, that's how graphically intensive it was at the time. And the game cost $1. Then of course there was a Virtua Fighter 4. There was a VF4 Evo. There was a Virtua Fighter 4 Final Tune, which was arcade only. Then there was a Virtua Fighter 5, Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown, Virtua Fighter 5 R, and now Virtua Fighter 5 US. Sega, please give us Virtua Fighter 6, please. Like, I really want to see this. Like, I feel like people don't put enough respect on Virtua Fighter's name. And, huge shout outs to Tekken. I do not have it in this list as well. So, Virtua Fighter here, I would put it at an A. Same place I would put Tekken if it wasn't this video. Okay, so next game I want to bring up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. This is one of my personal favorites of all time. It's a game that came out on Konami in Super Nintendo in the mid '90s. It's definitely like a Street Fighter clone. It's definitely like a Street Fighter 2 clone. Like, down to the controls and buttons. Leonardo is your classic Shoto. He has a fireball and uppercut. Michelangelo is kind of like your Guile of the game. Donatello is kind of like a mix between E Honda with 100 hand slaps. He has like his bow staff where you can mash. But then he has Chun-Li's spinning bird kick, but on the ground. He just does like a flip move, right? And so forth and so on. Cyber Shredder is there. He's kind of like the Bison of the game. We have Armagon, which is kind of like a Dalsim type character with a projectile, so forth and so on. And to the point where this game is really still played today. Check out my YouTube channel, FGC Sabin on YouTube. You will see some recent tournaments, even from a Combo Breaker, of us playing this on a real SNES console and having hardcore tournaments for it. Like, there's definitely like a game that I want to see an update for. I think it was amazing back in the day, and I think a lot of people agree. This is definitely one of my favorite Street Fighter 2 style spin-offs. But where do I put it? This is hard. This is hard. Cause it's hard to put it in the tier of like A because it didn't necessarily innovate, but the game is really damn fun, and I think it should. I'm gonna put it in a B. And like this game is fantastic, by the way. You guys should check it out. Shout out to Konami once again for that game. Okay, so up next, Fighter's History. So Fighter's History is another game done by Data East. I talked about them, doing Karate Champ like in the early 80s. Now, Data East was a game that was pretty controversial at the time. So it was branded to be like a Street Fighter 2 clone, pretty much. The first version of Fighter's History had 6 buttons, and Ray and Mizuguchi were kind of like your bootleg Ryu and Ken. You had Marstorius, which was kind of like Zangief. You had Sanchai, which was kind of like your Sagat of the game. You had Ryoko, who's like your traditional Japanese judo fighting girl, but she has some command grabs. Balin, etc., so forth and so on. This is a game that I enjoy so much. Fighter's History Dynamite. They're definitely so fast paced and really fun. Well, it's important to remember the first Fighter's History has 6 buttons, but the sequel, Fighter's History Dynamite on Neo Geo, actually has 4 buttons, because it's on the Neo Geo platform. So the reason why this game was really controversial, Capcom took Data East to court over this in the mid 90s, right? They said it was an infringement on the Street Fighter IP because they copied the control scheme, like some of the characters look similar, so forth and so on. The long story short is Capcom actually lost that case, right? I'm actually kind of happy they lost that case because if they had actually won, Capcom would have had a monopoly maybe on character designs and how movesets should be, and I'm definitely kind of glad that didn't happen. And anyway, Fighter's History is a really good franchise that you should check out. Check out Mikaido's YouTube channel if you want to see some recent play. It's also really popular on Fightcade 2. Check out Fighter's History Dynamite. And it's a game that I enjoy thoroughly, even though it's Street Fighter 2 clone. As far as where I would place it here, I'm gonna put it here at a B as well. Shout out to Fighters History. Okay, so the next game, Samurai Showdown. So Samurai Show. So this is one of the hallmark innovations for SNK right here. You know, Samurai Showdown. You know, it did come out during the fighting game heyday. You know, so it was another game in a shuffle of titles. But like the game is really spectacular. It was one of the first weapons-based fighting games. Period. It had like a lot of blood, a lot of animated gore. You know, it was set in like the medieval Japan setting, and like the main thing that stands out about that game to me, since it's a sword-based fighter and the combo system is not too heavy, it's really all like about like the one-hit kills that push you into rage. It's like you can do things like a heavy slash, and then depending on how much rage you have, like you'll take like their whole life bar. It's really cool. It was really cool at the time, like, you know, because, you know, you'll be turtling, you'll be trying to stab each other, and then out of nowhere, bam, and then it goes Ippon, and then you just die. It's like, I think it's so cool. The art design is so cool, and it's a series that's even relevant even today. You know, we have the current Samurai Showdown on the modern consoles, including PC. But just to go over a brief overview of their history, Samurai Showdown 1, Samurai Showdown 2, that's personally my favorite of the classics. Then there was a Samurai Showdown 3, which was a bit of a departure from the franchise, but it has some interesting ideas. Pretty broken though. Samurai Showdown 4, right? They're still on the Neo Geo platform, right? You know, Samurai Showdown 4 had 2 life bars, a lot of characters, had like the bush slash mechanic. I started in Samurai Showdown 3. Started getting a little bit complicated then. After Samurai Showdown 4, there was a Samurai Showdown 5. This is after when SNK went bankrupt, and Samurai Showdown 5 Special. There were also some Hyper Neo Geo 64 releases. I believe there were 2 of them. I think it was Samurai Showdown Warriors Rage and like another one. It's also Samurai Showdown RPG on the Neo Geo CD and PlayStation 1. Where should we put this? Shout out to Samurai Showdown. By the way, YouTube monsters, I know King of Fighters is not in this list. It's because I'm trying to keep this video short. Personally, I would put King of Fighters in a S or A. As far as where Samurai Showdown goes, I think it's a really influential title, so I'm gonna put it here at a A. Up next is X-Men: Children of the Atom. So X-Men: Children of the Atom is a game that came out in 1994, 1995 on the CPS2 platform. You know, same platform as Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter Alpha 1, 2, and 3, Marvel vs. Capcom, etc. Right? Now, like this is like another game released in the fighting games heyday in the 90s, right? And it was exceptional, man. Like, oh man, like Capcom's artists at that time, they were world class, right? You know, they basically took the Street Fighter engine and basically brought it to the next level, right? You know, you had super jumps, you had like multiple areas of the screen. The backgrounds were always changing mid-match. You know, like when you fight in the Danger Room in X-Men: Children of the Atom, the sprite art is unbelievable. It's unbelievably good. Like, you know, how good that game looked at the time. Like, that shit blew me away. Like, it looked so good that at the time, the consoles at the time, Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation, they could not do an arcade perfect conversion of X-Men: Children of the Atom. And the reason why is it did not have enough RAM to show all the sprites, you know, in their full glory. There were definitely some compromises made. But yeah, like it is definitely like a really broken title. It's one of the precursors to the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 series, you know. So I think this series definitely gets a lot of respect. You know, like X-Men: Children of the... So after X-Men: Children of the Atom, a brief timeline as to what came out. X-Men: Children of the Atom, Marvel Superheroes, then X-Men versus Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom 1, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Tatsunoko versus Capcom, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, and you know, here's where we are today. So X-Men, definitely one of the most influential franchises, you know, of all time. Maybe not Coda, although Coda is making a comeback. I want to give a shout out to the Children of the Atom community They've been doing like a lot of tournaments on Fightcade and organizing it through Discord. And I've actually have streamed some of the Children of the Atom events. If you want to see some high level play, head to my YouTube. And shout out to the X-Men Children of the Atom community that is still keeping this game strong on Fightcade. As to where I would put it, man. You know what? I got to give it an A. Like, so when I speak for X-Men here, basically covering the entire Marvel franchise. Some people might put that as an S, but I personally think it's an A. Really respectable franchise. You guys should all check out any of the Marvel games. They're really fun, although they're really broken. Okay, up next. So we got Killer Instinct. Oh man, I'm thinking about the intro song, the Killer Instinct, and it brings me back. So it was a game that was co-developed by Nintendo and Rare in the mid 1990s. So one of the things that stood out for that game to me, was it's like they made really good use of 3D graphics in that game. Like the artwork was phenomenal at the time. Soundtrack also phenomenal. It was also done by like a Western developer. I think Rare is based out of the UK. Shouts to Rare and Nintendo for making it happen. That was also one of the games where the technology was so new in the attract intro. It would say coming to your home soon on the Ultra 64 in 1990, whatever, right? And obviously the Ultra 64 became the N64 at the end, and it didn't come out till years later as a Killer Instinct Gold, I believe, on the N64. It was also like one of the first fighting games that had like a hard drive. The game was actually really huge. Anyway, it was a 6-button title. I feel like it was kind of competing with Mortal Kombat back then. So it did have the Street Fighter layout, but it had pre-canned combos. Kind of like how the current Mortal Kombat are. Like you can kind of do like a dollar combo or like a dollar string, but the combos in this game were really, really, really freaking long. One of the most famous combos I remember in Killer Instinct is the Cinder Infinite. Hopefully the editors can find a clip of that. It's a pretty famous juggle combo. You just juggle them forever. Chief Thunder has like some dope stuff. And the game is really broken with the combos. Kind of like Marvel. But like I said, again, it did have a lot of innovations brought to the genre as well. That was another game that I enjoyed personally on the side. It wasn't my main game or anything, but when I checked out Killer Instinct, I was like, hey, you know what? These graphics are cool. Kind of has fatalities, and like the combos are really long, and the music is badass. It did get ported to the Super Nintendo though, as like a home release. There were obviously some compromises made, as it could not keep up with the original hardware, but it had like a really cool CD in there called the Killer Cuts, and the soundtrack for that game is sick. And obviously with Killer Instinct, Killer Instinct 1, Killer Instinct 2, KI Gold, and all the way up to the new versions on the Xbox One. Microsoft, Iron Galaxy, Double Helix are responsible for bringing that franchise back, and it's still relevant today with one of the best netcodes around. So definitely check it out. As far as where I would place it here on this tier list, so Killer Instinct, I would probably put it. So I'll probably put it at a B personally, and I'm a little bit biased here. I don't have that much experience with the franchise, but I definitely respect the contributions it's done to the scene. And I think the new Killer Instinct is definitely like a game worth checking out. Okay, let's see. So up next, we're getting close to the end. So, Soul Edge. Okay, so Soul Edge. So it is the first like 3D weapons based fighter. And it's still weapon lore. We're gonna talk about this a little bit later. But Soul Edge was done. So Soul Edge, the first version of the game, was done on the PlayStation 1 platform. It was a Namco title. I believe it was done on a System 11 or System 12 in the arcade, which is basically PlayStation 1 hardware. I could be wrong on the exact PCB. I don't actually own the arcade PCB myself, but I believe it is System 11 or 12. Again, just like Tekken 1, Tekken 1 is also worthy of A, by the way, but we don't have it here. Just like Tekken 1, the first version of Soul Edge, it was a 30 FPS game, so it was more like a tech demo, right? Graphics were really good. Yeah, like sword-based fighting. It's like you had side steps. You could walk into the ground. You could walk into the ground, foreground or background, etc., etc. You're able to control the characters on a 3D plane. Namco's sound design system was really badass. Everything was really badass. Everything was really badass about the Soul Calibur franchise. Again, it's not something that I played competitively myself, but like growing up, as a kid, it's like 12, 13, I'm like, hey, this is cool, let me play some Siegfried and mash AAV, right? You're like, ha, 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 like I listen to the music, right? The music for that game is really good. The characters are iconic, right? It's definitely like a franchise that you should check out, right? So obviously, when I'm talking about Soul Edge, we're talking about the Soul Calibur series. So after Soul Edge, there was an arcade revision. Then Soul Calibur 1 came out. Soul Calibur 2 came out after that. That was ported to like a lot of home consoles where where each console had their own exclusive console character. So Nintendo had Link, whereas Sony had PlayStation 2 had Heihachi, and Xbox actually had Spawn by Todd McFarlane. Shout out to them for that, making that happen. Then there was Soul Calibur 3, really controversial game in the franchise. It's kind of like a hit or miss. The story mode was really good. The created character was really good, but a lot of people had issues with the gameplay on the PS2 version. Definitely like a little bit rushed. The true proper version of that game is Soul Calibur 3 Arcade Edition. That is on Namco System 246 arcade board, which is the PlayStation 2. That's considered to be the definitive version of the game, although it did not really get a release too much outside Japan. It's kind of like a limited release. Then we have Soul Calibur 4, which has Darth Vader, some of the Star Wars characters in it. People in that one could cry about Algo a lot. Then we got Soul Calibur 5, that's more of on the modern, last generation systems, PS3 and Xbox One. I remember doing a lot of events with that during the MLG era. And now here we are up to Soul Calibur 6. And, Soul Calibur, although I don't play it seriously or anything, it's the community and the franchise have really grown on me. I do weekly tournaments with the Soul Calibur guys every single week, on a Cloud Parsec. I've always been blowing it up with them, for over a year and a half now. So I've got to see some of the best Soul Calibur players in the world. And I personally really have a lot of respect for this franchise. I think the Soul Edge, Soul Calibur series, I would love to see Namco give Soul Calibur or Soul Edge the same type of attention that they give Tekken. I feel like this is kind of their redheaded stepchild that they don't give enough resources to. As far as to where I would put it, I think it belongs in the same place. So whether I would put Tekken and King of Fighters, I'm going to give it an A. I think the franchise is very solid. So, all right. Next thing we're going to go over is our Rival Schools. So, Rival Schools really popping now. Street Fighter 5, you've seen Akira in Street Fighter 5. She just came out last week. As of the time of this video, she's really making all the waves right now. Check out Battle Circuit. Last week, Punk won the last two tournaments with Akira. And he actually beat me at IFC Yipes' event on Tuesday and won against Idom and Battle Circuit on Wednesday, which was yesterday with Akira. So it's a really cool franchise. Just a little bit of backstory here on Rival Schools. It was a spin-off franchise, it was definitely a spin-off franchise. It was one of Capcom's titles. It came out in the mid-90s again. This was on the PlayStation. This was on the PlayStation 1 hardware, so I believe arcade version might have been Sony ZN1 or ZN2 hardware at the time. So Rival Schools 1, PlayStation 1 title. It's definitely your traditional, Japanese high school type story. You have your Yakuza in there. You have your gangsters and stuff. The ambience of it is all sick. If you want a take on over exaggerated Japanese high school fighting game, this is the franchise for you. So some of my favorite characters in that series, I'm biased to Hideo and Kyoko. Hideo is a teacher in the game, and he's kind of your Ryu of the game, and Kyoko is the co-teacher. Each version of the game it was like you could pick multiple characters, but you could switch in between rounds, right? So it's not true. It's not like true tag team versus style, right? So the first one you would have like 2 characters, and then part 2, the one that came out on Dreamcast, you could switch between 3 characters. It had like double teams, triple teams, all that. The first version of the game was rough on the graphics because it was PlayStation 1 hardware, but part 2, Project Justice, it really upped the ante in the graphical scale. You know, 'cause it's based on Dreamcast hardware. It's definitely infinitely more powerful. The console version of Rival Schools, it did have like its whole separate mode, you know, outside the actual core fighting game that you could be stuck in for hours. I think it was called the Evolution Disc for Rival Schools 1. Anyway, like, check out that game. You know, if anything, like, you know, for the aesthetics and the lore, you know, it's really hype. Like, I really think it's a cool franchise, and I think Capcom, you know, bringing Akira and Street Fighter 5, I think that was a really good move because you got to teach the new generation about the retro, right? You know, there's no way, you know, there's no way this fighting game genre is going to evolve if you don't pay homage to the roots. And I think like her implementation in Street Fighter 5 is really sick, down to the move set, down to the character design. Anyway, guys, check out Rival Schools. You know, I think it's a really great franchise. Where I would put it in, I'll probably put it at B. Because like the game didn't get played hardcore back in the day. You know, there's like some old boomers like myself that say, "Oh man, you know, I was a Rival Schools fan the whole time," but you know, wasn't necessarily played any big tournaments or anything. I just think the franchise is really cool, and you should check it out. If you guys haven't noticed, I didn't play anything in D because I like fighting games. Okay, so we are down to the last 2. So here, Battle Arena Toshinden. So Battle Arena Toshinden, it was a game done by Takara. It was actually like an original PlayStation 1 launch title, right? So this was one of the games that defined the Sony PlayStation 1 system, especially in the US, right? So once again, like the titles of the era, it is a 30 FPS fighting game, right? Graphics at the time, they were pretty good. You know, music was pretty good. It was a little bit sluggish though. You know, like you had like your punches, you had your kicks, you had like a side roll. But the first version of Toshinden was kind of pretty slow on the movement, like I said. Still, I did enjoy it for what it was. You know, like as a tech demo, it was pretty interesting because if you were an original PlayStation user and you got the PlayStation 1 and you got Toshinden and Ridge Racer on launch day, and you went home and you booted that shit up at home, you're like, wow, like 3D is getting there. This is possible. At the time, you know, 2D sprite-based games, they were dominating the landscape. You know, and it's like the first taste at what future 3D could be like, right? So with Toshinden, there were several sequels. There was a Battle Arena Toshinden 2, which definitely had like an upgrade on the graphics. And then like I think there was it got ported to Saturn as Battle Arena Toshinden Europe. And there was Battle Arena Toshinden 3, right? That game actually had 60 FPS. It was on PlayStation 1, but when you play 60 FPS, you'd have to remove all the background stuff, right? So that's the level of hardware we were working with. You know, it's kind of like a compromise. Like, you want that 60 FPS gameplay, you got to make compromises in other places, pretty much, right? So it's one of the first early 3D titles, like I mentioned, you know, in the vein of Tekken, right? But as far as I would put it on the, I think the one to play probably is Battle Arena Toshinden 3. I'd love to see a tournament for that game sometime, especially with the 60 FPS mode. Like, you know, I think it'd be pretty cool to watch. There's a lot of characters in it, you know. Sanford Kelly or Dron, if you're watching this, to make a Toshinden 3 tournament happen, I think that'll be really cool. As far as where I would put it personally, I'll probably have to put it at a C, right? And that's only because like, you know, the series has not been revived in a long time. It did make a lot of cultural impact because it was a launch PlayStation 1 title, but the franchise never really continued after that. So it would be hard for me to put it in the B tier games. Okay, so the last game here that I'm gonna have here, and like I said, there's so many games I'm missing, man. This video would be way too long if I covered everything. The last game I have here is Weapon Lord. It's a game that I believe was it came out in the mid 90s again. It was on Super Nintendo. One of the interesting things about this game that you might not be aware of So this actually has a designer that has something in relation to Street Fighter. So James Goddard, right? James Goddard was one of the developers on a Street Fighter 2 Turbo, not Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, right? He actually did the all the balance tweaks for Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and he also created, before he left Capcom, he created the Street Fighter character DJ, which you guys all know, I'm sure, right? We don't see him in Street Fighter 5, but he's been in Street Fighter 4, been around since Super Turbo, right? So like this guy definitely has some history making out fighting games. So Weapon Lord was one of the really interesting 2D based weapon fighters, kind of in the lieu of Samurai Showdown. But the control method was definitely different from traditional fighting game titles at the time. It had finishing blows and killing moves and all that. But the moveset, the closest thing that I can relate it to in modern fighting game terms, I think Gold Lewis, or like Guilty Gear Strive. The control methods were kind of like that, right? So that's one of the reasons why I think it's really innovative. In like a sea of fighting game titles at the time, this was a game that had like a really innovative like control system. The graphics were really good, weapons based fighter, like I said, and it was done by a legendary developer that a lot of people do not know of today. Yeah, definitely check it out on the Super Nintendo platform. Go look up some videos. I personally think like it's a really underrated franchise. It's hard. All right, I would put it at I'm gonna put it at the top of C. I'm gonna put it at the top of C here personally, although I think it could be a B. But the only reason is like I think I'm kind of rating this by cultural impact and just impact on the scene in general. Weapon Lord, although like it was very innovative, there was only one release of it, and never got another one done. Although I would love to see another one. And guys, this is gonna wrap it up for the video. This has actually been 46 minutes long. Hope you guys enjoyed this lesson down history lane. Please let us know what you thought in the comments. Besides my gray beard over here, that's how you know like I'm wise, guys. I've been around the block. For a long minute. I've seen a lot of fighting games. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Don't get too triggered if I didn't include like X or Y fighting game here. As you guys can see, this video is really long. I hope you guys enjoyed about the lore. Make sure you guys follow, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Shout out to Beast Coast, and we'll see you guys on the next video. BC Arturo Sanchez out.